Viewers, greetings. South Asia is the homeland of one of the world's earliest civilizations, the Indus civilization. The people of the region share a common culture, regional rituals, customs, modes of worship, language, and even literature. Therefore, despite fragmentation, it forms a common cultural realm. South Asia is a dynamic region. However, it's home to a very complex politics and unresolved disputes also. Spark the Peace Builders have invited a think tank professor, a geopolitical analyst from the Australian National University, Department of International Relations, Bell School, who is also a distinguished academic and political advisor on South Asia. We'll be talking on South Asian politics and challenges today. A warm welcome to you, Professor Claude Rakisits.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Okay, Professor, I'll begin by asking you, just at the outset, can you give us an introduction to the region of South Asia?
Okay, how many minutes do I have for this?
Well, Professor, we will have 45 minutes.
45 minutes. Okay, well, that's a big question. Well, the region, of course, just as you said, it's a unique region in that, in many ways, it's sort of bookended, if we want to use that term, between really Myanmar and all the way to Afghanistan. But sometimes, of course, Afghanistan is part of it as well. I mean, delimitations, geographic delimitations, are, of course, man-made. What does it mean? I mean, it's not as if people all of a sudden change because, oh, you know, we're in South Asia, now we are in this place called Central Asia or South Central Asia or whatever. But that's what I'm looking at, basically anything south of the Himalayas up to Myanmar and then roughly Afghanistan. But I would include Afghanistan because especially nowadays with all the interactions between certainly South Asia or Pakistan, India and Afghanistan. So that's what I look at South Asia. The way I see it, it's of course South Asia is a big area. It's a massive area, and of course one doesn't have to come from Mars to know that South Asia is utterly dominated by one big country called India, which is right bang in the middle. And because of that, it dominates not only the politics but the cultures, trade as well. But because there's so many divisions, and we can talk about that later, that are historical. And sadly, there's a lot of desire to try to work around India, which of course makes it very difficult. But because India is so dominant and so not only a big country, both in geography and population, and it dominates, it makes it very difficult then for integration. So, for example, the South Asian Association of Regional Cooperation, as we all, you know, your listeners will know what it is. It's probably the least integrated of all regional organizations around the world. Right. You know, they compare sometimes to Europe or Southeast Asia. They shouldn't, because it is totally different. But one of the reasons why it's least integrated is because one of the participants in there, in this case India, is so big and so dominant. And so it makes it very difficult to integrate. That's one of the issues, of course. A lot of many other sort of geostrategic issues that make it difficult for integration. But that's the way I see. But South Asia, often people talk of South Asia, but South Asia again has got a lot of divisions. Not only in many ways it shouldn't be divided because in many ways, as you said initially, it has a lot of cultural commonality. Whether it's Hindu, Muslims, ethnicity, geography, climate, but there's also a lot of things that divide it. It's difficult to tell what has led to it. Certainly, partition 1947 certainly didn't help things at all. And now it would look like increasingly the divisions in South Asia are very much increasing. I think I'll leave it at that. Is that sort of what you're looking for?
Yes, Professor. I want to ask you, since we are using a very restrictive definition of South Asia, we'll restrict it to India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. This is the region we shall be talking about.
Sure.
Can we evaluate their democratic trajectories? of India and Pakistan more specifically?
All right, that's a good one. Let's start with the big one, India. Initially, and we'll go from 1947 because that's really when they finally got their independence. It's not as if there wasn't history before that. Don't get me wrong, but sort of more modern history since 1947. You know, right from 1947 with India, I mean, there was elections. Uh, Democracy seemed to be working, except for a certain period for a couple of years under Indira Gandhi, where there was
Emergency.
emergency rule. That's exactly right. Otherwise, there were elections. Uh, there were more, and again, there were elections. They were more or less free and fair, except in one part you would know well called Kashmir, and we can talk about Kashmir later. But certainly, on the whole, it was a democratic system. Okay, there are flaws, but let's just leave it at that for that. We can talk about Prime Minister Modi later on, but that's that. Next door in Pakistan, and of course we can't forget East Pakistan until 1971. The first real election was in 1971, so they had to wait, the poor Pakistanis, for something like 24 years to finally get their election, and then of course that ultimately led, and we know why, to the breakup of Pakistan, East Pakistan becoming Bangladesh. But having said that, there were other elections after that, but during the whole time, and for various for reasons of geography in Pakistan, and we can talk about that later as well. Um, Democracy in Pakistan has always been very wobbly, to put it nicely, wobbly, and even when it was free and more or less fair, there was always this big sort of institution called the army there to facilitate or to facilitate the election process, or to determine or to assist the election result. Okay, it wasn't always open. There are many ways of to make an election not quite free and not quite fair, but there are reasons. So now we've had elections, and of course, in Pakistan there's been four military rules, as we know: Ayub Khan, Yahya Khan, Zia, and Musharraf. All four military regimes were very different, quite different, but they were nevertheless non-representative governments.
Local people.
So that's people wearing uniforms, and mainly a headquarters in Rawalpindi, and so that was an issue. And so still today, when there are elections, like Imran Khan was elected, it doesn't matter who's elected in Pakistan today, even though they've been elected democratically, they simply cannot take decisions, especially big decisions of national security, without consulting with the military. Is that bad? Not necessarily, because that's just the name of the game. Now, I can spend a couple of minutes as to why the military has been so important in Pakistan, but they are important, and I think one of the main reasons is because of the geography of the country, the way Pakistan was created in 1947, and with not only two wings separated by over 1,000 miles of, let's be frank, hostile Indian territory, means that national security was always going to be a very, very important issue for the governing of Pakistan, simply for the existing of the Pakistan, which of course came, became very evident in 1971 when India invaded East Pakistan and dismembered Pakistan following that. But so because of the difficulty of the geography and being surrounded on the one side by India and on the other side by Afghanistan, which has yet to recognize the Durand Line and never really was, well, actually has never been friendly towards Pakistan, national security was a very important issue all the time. And this is why then the army, because that's the biggest service there in the military, has always played a prominent role in the national security and foreign policy of the country. And that has completely distorted the development of democracy in Pakistan.
Thank you, Professor. Professor, we see that in the South Asian Indian subcontinent, each region has its own narrative. India has a different narrative, Pakistan has a different narrative, and both these narratives are exactly on crossroads. The Indian as well as the Pakistani narrative, the political narrative. What are the consequences in the geopolitical dynamics of these two narratives that India and Pakistan have?
Well, when you talk about the Indian narrative, which one are you specifically thinking about? Can you just elaborate a bit more? So,
With regard to Pakistan, since it was a division that was created by the colonial nation on the religious lines, after that Pakistan developed an anti-India narrative, uh, 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 whipping up the Muslim passions. And similarly, India, though it became a secular nation, but in the present terms, if we see, India has become very, very polarized. And it has
okay.
put up a similar narrative with regard to Pakistan, as Pakistan used to have. So, what are the consequences in the geopolitical dynamics of these two
Okay.
equal narratives?
Thank you very much for elaborating. Just because it's a big topic, I just want to know what you were exactly looking for. Well, I think that this is a thing. A lot. It goes right back. The partition of British India was a massive, massive issue. I'm not even talking simply on human terms and the number of people who died in the process. The massive movement, the biggest ever in humanity, of 7 million people, exchange of people, 1 million plus people dying in the process. The upheaval that this caused was just massive. Um, and this was all based on religion, which is just itself incredible. And I'm saying incredible because religion is something that is deeply held by people. Okay. And so when two nations, well, certainly based on the two nation theory of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and I suppose your listeners will know what I'm talking about, based on that two nation theory. Just briefly, is that the Hindus and Muslims, that two nations, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the founder of Pakistan, believed that these two nations could not live together, and they needed two countries, and that's why we have Pakistan. That's just background information for your listeners who don't know. And so the fact that this happened really that became the lens through which Pakistani leaders, whether military or civilians, saw their relationship with India. And a lot of people, interestingly, said, "Oh, this is a crazy idea. Uh, you know, uh, a nation is not based on religion, but it's based on race or ethnicity or something along those lines, but not religion." And for until quite recently, they had an argument. But now, when we see what we're seeing in Prime Minister Modi's India and the way he treats the 200 million Muslims, well, it's becoming increasingly evident that Muhammad Ali Jinnah actually had a point, that it's becoming now very, very difficult for Muslims in India to actually live comfortably, safely, with a sense that they're going to have a fulfilling life under basically a very nationalist Indian or Hindu nationalist party, BJP. And it's becoming very, very difficult. And of course, as you know, it's passed several pieces of legislation that make life quite miserable for Muslims. And so now people are saying, well, it seems to me that Muhammad Ali Jinnah was actually correct. Maybe it was a good thing to have a separation or partition of British India into two nations, Muslims and India and Hindu. So that's that. So the fact is, so that's I've sort of went forward a bit, but the fact that British India was split up between two nations on the basis of religion has very much affected everything. They basically have been at best, those two countries in a non-war situation, not peace. Forget, they're not at peace with each other. They're in a non-war situation at best. And we know they've gone at war. And I'm not sure when war starts or when it stops. They talk about the Cargill. And is that war? Is that not war? How many bullets do you have to use before you call it war? But the fact is, the fact that way British or the way British India was partitioned and how the birth of these two nations began has completely colored their relationship. And as you know, anything goes wrong, the Indians will blame the Pakistanis. So, and anything goes wrong, Pakistanis will blame the Indians. And we can see why. And often there's good reason for this, because let's not pretend both of them are doing, things that you shouldn't be doing, but all countries do a lot of things they shouldn't be doing, incidentally. Trying to create trouble, whether it's in Balochistan, the Indians doing that, the Taliban, whatever. I'm sure the Pakistanis were involved with the Sikhs, in Punjab back in the 80s. So there's a lot of things. So no one is clean, whether it's in South Asia or in the rest of the world, incidentally. So, but the partition, the narrative that both countries are pushing all the time, because all countries have got narratives. We have a narrative in Australia. The United States has a narrative. China, we all have narratives, because you need to be able to keep your nation, as opposed to your state, nation together, so that you're all on the same music score. Because if you don't, you have division, and you don't want that. And so you have, and the narrative for India is, of course, the democratic country, and we hear that more and more all the time. Still, we're a democracy. Well, it's a bit of a wobbly democracy there. We can talk about that later. And of course, in Pakistan, Muslim Islam is uniting force. Yes and no. I mean, you also Baluch. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. But what I'm saying is that religion and the way British India was partitioned, and how the two nations were created, and just think about Bangladesh as well, how that affected, has really affected the three countries, and how they see themselves and how they project their power externally.
Okay, Professor. The polarization in both the countries has become an impediment for both the countries, people in both the countries, to live in a coexistent state, to live in harmonious way. Professor, do you agree that elected democracies are fast becoming more authoritarian with the kind of coercive powers that they are wielding against their own people? Such authoritarian democracies, are they in sync with the peace perspectives in Indian and Pakistani perspective, especially? How strong do you think are the Indian and Pakistani democratic institutions? What's your analysis?
Okay, well, yeah. Definitely democracies are not only in South Asia, but also in the rest of the world. Just have to look at, in the United States under President Trump, and many other places, incidentally. Democracies are going authoritarian. They are taking an authoritarian hue for various reasons. So you can get elected quite freely and fairly, but you can pass legislations, and that become more and more restrictive, even though it's passed quite legally by the parliament of your country, whether it's in India or in the United States or whatever, because the other politicians have been elected on that same platform, and so there's a mood. If the mood is for that, and they've been elected by the people, that's all fine. Is it still a democracy that we're all used to? Well, maybe not. It's the same. So looking at South Asia, which is our topic, Prime Minister Modi, he got elected. First of all, it was a big shock to a lot of people that he was elected with such a big majority in 2014. But then even a bigger shock when he increased his majority and now has control of both houses in 2019. And so he pretty much has a free range, and the exec and the judiciary is getting a bit very sort of put a lot of pressure being put on the judiciary, which is always a bit of a worry when the three arms of any government, judicial, executive, and legislative, are dominated by one party. And so definitely there's an authoritarianism in India now, as we know, whether we're talking about the Muslims or we're talking about the way the center deals with the states, and of course Kashmir. We can talk about that later as well, and what's happening there. Same now in Pakistan, that's a bit different there, as we know, because that sort of people are sort of used to having the military and specifically the army playing a very strong role in politics, just in politics in general in Pakistan, whether directly through just basically running the country and being the president of the country, or behind the scenes. And in many ways, the military in Pakistan still play a very important role in the governance of Pakistan, just behind the scene. And in a way, it's actually much more efficient for them because something goes wrong, they can blame the civilians. So that's that. But there's certain habit to that over there in Pakistan. Is it all bad? I know. In academia in the West, there's this person. This is what I believe, is that there's this feeling that all civilian governments are good and all military governments are bad, and that's it. It's black and white. Well, I'm not sure if that's correct, because just what I just said, some civilian governments get pretty authoritarian, but they get away with it because they say, "Oh, but I was elected. I mean, that's what the people want." Well, maybe not. And sometimes, actually, some military governments around the world actually sometimes actually listen more to the people than some civilians have been elected. So it's not all black and white. The only difference is that now the world now is much less tolerant of military regimes, because I'm not sure exactly the reason, but one of the reasons I would say it's that for PR reasons, it doesn't look as good. It doesn't look good to be okay with a military regime, but it's better to be okay with an authoritarian democracy. Okay, and this is why, in many ways, Prime Minister Modi, is getting away with the things he's doing, because it's meant to be the largest democracy, and I use the word democracy very, loosely here, given how things are panning out in India sometimes. And so, but because he's the largest democracy, he knows he can get away with it. And the main reason for this is because of just the much bigger geostrategic picture, and that is China. Everything, much everything now, in international relations is seen through the prism of, okay, China. Where do people stand on China? Sound like Trump here, but it is very much that. It's China, and so there's this thing, as you will have heard, the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, Quad, which has India, Japan, Australia, and United States, and they're there. Let's not beat around the bush to try to counter one way or another China, and China knows it. We know it. Everyone knows it. Okay. And they're meant to be the democracies. And yes, they are democracies. All the countries, the four leaders that have been elected. Fair enough. But, but because it's so important to have this narrative that it's important to counter China, which incidentally is doing a lot of nasty things. And we can talk about that, about what China does internally and what it's doing externally. But we'll talk about that in a minute. But the fact is, they are there to counter China, and the last thing they want to do, the three They don't want to gang up against or go too public about saying, Prime Minister Modi, your democracy is a bit wobbly there. You need to start lifting your game on human rights. And Kashmir not looking so good. What do we have instead? Total silence. And the silence on Kashmir, the silence on human rights in India is utterly deafening, deafening. But you will hear nothing. So we have Mr. Blinken coming from the United States, the oldest democracy, and he says nothing. And when he's asked about democracy in India, what does he say? Oh, democracy is a work in progress. Oh, really? Okay, well, if that's your view. And that was sweet music to Indians. So that's that. So I'm not sure where, I think that answers your question more or less. I'm not sure what the question was.
Right, Professor, right. It was a pleasure listening to you. You're answering my queries. Professor, what you just now mentioned, it has resulted in internal conflict, the citizen conflict internally, either whether it's India or it's Pakistan. That's what I get from you, what you say, because liberal voices are being constantly silenced. Professor, talking about Pakistan, there have been layers of violence to Pakistan's political landscape. Do you see in the present times under Prime Minister Imran Khan, Pakistan is strengthening as a democracy in comparison to India? Is Pakistan going towards a more of a civilian rule? Because earlier on we have seen hegemonic interference into the political affairs of the country. But after the Musharraf's indictment, what we see that Imran Khan is trying very hard for a civilian rule. Is it going absolutely towards a democracy? Or is it moving forward?
Yeah. This is a very good question. Look, if I had that crystal ball, I'd be making much more money, and I'd probably be much more well known in the world. But I mean, the fact is, I sincerely believe Imran Khan, and hopefully one day I will meet him. He is a breath of fresh air, really is. Now, a lot of people can't stand the man. They think he's a fraud. I don't think so. I do believe he can be a bit naive. I think he can be a bit naive. But that's a breath of fresh air, as I said. Compared to the two dynasties that basically run Pakistan, the Bhutto and the Sharif dynasty, one after the other, either in government or in opposition, whatever, and then various parts, federal or province. The fact is, he's trying desperately as well to make Pakistan more democratic. But as I've said before, he is bound by many things. One, we have the institution of the army. Okay, that's the hard man who live in Rawalpindi. As I said before, he's naive, but he's not completely naive. He knows if he wants to take tough decisions, he can't do it without talking first to the generals. It doesn't matter which generals. Okay. Whereas General Bajwa today and another general tomorrow. But he needs to talk to them. And that's okay, because just that's part of the political makeup of the country. Okay. And so to try to make it more democratic, we're really talking here about making the military, because that's what we're talking about specifically about Pakistan, making the military less powerful in the governing of Pakistan. Because, as I said, they're behind the scenes, they have a lot of power. Now, to be able to do that in many ways, Pakistan and India need to be at peace with each other. And this is why I fundamentally believe that Kashmir is at the crux of resolving issues in South Asia. And I really believe this, is that Kashmir is an unresolved, festering issue between the two countries. I've said that many times in many places. People get bored hearing this, but the two countries that spend zillions of rupees on military. I mean, so much. Dollars and rupees that could have been spent which have been spent on, arming the two countries so they can go to war and nobody wins and lots of people get killed and nothing's resolved. But that's all money that could all have all been used on real things that count for socioeconomic development, health, medicine, education, things that are utterly lacking in Pakistan and India. They're both at the same level in the socioeconomic development, and that is very low. When we're talking, 1.3 billion people, Indians, and over 220 million people in Pakistan, who really, some people live in utter abject poverty. It's obscene and just not right. I firmly believe if Kashmir could be fixed, and I think you may have read my paper on Kashmir and how to resolve it. I do believe that if Kashmir is resolved, it may not completely resolve relations between Pakistan and India, but it certainly would remove a very, very, very big issue between the two countries, and it certainly could lead to better relations. And it's better relations that would then enable, would give more power to the civilians in Pakistan to be able to say, look, military, we're now at peace with India. Kashmir has been resolved in one way or another. We maybe don't need any more 700,000 military, arming them, housing them, and whatever, all the things that go with it, all the perks. And maybe we're going to, clip your wings a bit and chop you down to 200,000 or whatever, okay? That would be a good start. But that's only doable if there's peace between Pakistan and India, because quite fairly, I mean, India really does not like Pakistan. And if they're given half a chance, they will dismember it once more. And so I can understand why the military in Pakistan say, well, look, we need to defend ourselves. And that's why, as long as Kashmir is there, there will be a good reason for the military to use to say we need all these weapons so we can fight against the Indians. But the problem is, it goes back to the whole issue of the big geostrategic picture with China. And I've tried to sell my Kashmir ideas to loads of people, and they say either I'm crazy or it's not going to work or whatever, or they don't bother. Because at the end of the day, it's all about China. And, and that's why, going back to, the Secretary of, American Secretary of State who just came to visit, he was not going to bring up Kashmir because the West, the Americans, no one is going to try to irritate Prime Minister Modi on the issue of Kashmir when the bigger picture is how do we deal with China. And so then the Kashmir sadly become just a side issue, and it doesn't. And Modi knows it. He knows it. And so the bad guy is always Pakistan, which fits then the Indian narrative. You see bad guys always creating trouble, bringing it up to the United Nations. And then they say things like Kashmir is a domestic issue. It's been resolved. No, it's not a domestic issue. And no, it hasn't been resolved. And if they were resolved, why do you need 900,000 troops to keep them down or keep people jailed for 2 years? I think so. Really, and it goes back to the partition days. It all goes back. There's a problem between the two countries because how they were brought up. Then for last 70 years plus, they've had a difficult relationship. If that can be fixed, and one of the big issues is Kashmir, then we can then talk more about democracy and reduce the power of the military and democracy in Pakistan. And then people maybe have better lives in both countries.
Right, Professor. Professor, we'll just shift our focus to Pakistan.
Sure.
Pakistan has internal problems, the Tehreek-e-Taliban of Pakistan, the Baluch movement, the sectarian violence, or the minority violence that's there. These are all impediments in the Pakistani democracy. In 2014, we had Zarb-e-Azb, the military offensive of Pakistan. The TTP cadres, they broke and then retreated into Afghanistan. Do you see a potential major resurgence now that US troops have withdrawn from Afghanistan and Taliban are steadily occupying the Afghan territory? A Baloch insurgency and the Taliban, they are a potential threat to the CPEC corridor also. And China has made major investments in Iran and the adjacent areas also. Do you think this is a threat to the region, security of the region?
Absolutely. I've written about this as well, and I've said this back for the last 12 years easily, that if the Taliban reclaims power in Kabul, and I suspect it will happen before Christmas, okay, at the rate it's going. This is very, very bad news for Pakistan, because the Taliban is obviously the TTP, which is basically the Taliban was a midwife to the creation of TTP. Let's put it that way in 2007, and so they have a lot of ideological links. They are brothers in arms. They have the same very, very warped ideology and a very warped view of Islam, and a very sick view of how to treat women as a starter. Uh, and we can see what's happening now already in Afghanistan, where the Taliban has taken over. It's shocking, the treatment of women there. And so, but the fact is, they are winning. They're absolutely winning every day, and they're winning much more quickly than anyone expected. And the main reason for that, the Taliban of today is not a Taliban of 1990s. It's actually probably worse, in that they have learned in 20 years in doing their thing in the tribal areas of Pakistan, and eastern provinces of Afghanistan. They've learned that they've cleaned up their act. They realized the mistakes they'd made in trying to gain power. But they are very, very nasty. And the big difference now between the Taliban of today and the one of 1990s is that in 1990s, it was pretty much 99% Pushtun. Now it has much more embraced the other ethnic groups in Afghanistan. Was it Uzbeks or Turkmenistan or whatever, and not so much as ours, but certainly the Uzbeks and all that. And so that is why it's been so much easier for them to conquer areas which before they just simply could not conquer back in the 1990s. That's one reason. The other reason is, of course, the government in Kabul is weak, is corrupt, and the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces are not going to die to defend President Ghani and his people. And I suspect the Taliban, with a lot of people from those areas, from the Uzbeks and all that, they're going to cut deals with all those warlords, and that's going to. So I suspect, because of all that, and no one getting to the military, there's no air support from the Americans, and the Americans have made it very clear they are not going to do anything. Today we heard it. The spokesman in the Pentagon said, well, if they can't defend themselves, that's the way it is. They have completely washed their hands off Afghanistan. And that is very bad news, because the Taliban comes to power. The TTP will then have a good springboard from which to launch attacks into Pakistan. It will be the strategic depth in reverse. And they'll make life miserable for people in Pakistan. And same thing with the Baluch. And the TTP and the Baluch Liberation Army have a lot of sort of operational, work that they work together. So this could be bad news for Pakistan's own security. The only thing that, and of course that could threaten the whole CPEC and what happens there. And this is why now everyone outside Afghanistan, that's Iran, that's India, that's China, that's Pakistan. Everybody wants to go basically and start picking at the fast becoming carcass that is Afghanistan. And so everyone wants to have their say. And I suspect, and I wrote an article recently about that, China and Afghanistan, you may have seen, I posted it. I think China is going to win on this one. For main reason is that China has a border with Afghanistan. It's a short border, but it has a border, a land border. They're building actually a road now from the Panhandle and from China, from Xinjiang province, and they have a lot of money. I'm not sure they will demand that the Taliban, break their links with the East Turkestan Islamic movement. But whether or not that happens or not, I don't know. But China would very much like to be the dominant external player in Afghanistan, because that would fit nicely with CPEC, China's relationship with Pakistan, and it will be the last sort of geographic piece in that area that would fit nicely for all the sort of the transportation routes, communications routes in that whole area leading up to Iran and the Indian Ocean. So, so what is happening in Afghanistan is very, very worrisome for Pakistan, because there will be refugees. I know Pakistan's built a fence, but fences can be broken down. Anything that's built by man can be broken down by man. We know that. And so, but there'll be refugee issues, and then there will be instability. And you know what they say, if your house, if there's a fight in your next door neighbor's house, that's their problem. If the house is burning, that becomes your problem.
Right, Professor. Professor, in 2019, Donald Trump-led US administration granted critical concessions to Taliban and even accepted their demands of peace talks without the Afghan government in Qatar. The Afghan government was in a way illegitimized, and US completely surrendered to the Taliban. Do you think that the US acceptance of the Taliban demands was a very bad decision, was a very bad agreement? Because they left them completely in lurch. The Afghan army is unable to defend itself. It was only because the US troops were present that Afghanistan was at least a safe zone. Now the situation has become worrisome because the because of the withdrawal of the US troops abruptly and completely. They are left to on their own. And we have seen that the Afghan military, they are even surrendering to Taliban. That's why their movement is much forward, and they are occupying the territory. So do you think this was a bad agreement on the part of
Well,
Trump? He earlier also
it,
rescinded many good agreements like the Iran nuclear deal.
it was a very, very bad agreement, and that should come as no surprise to you, given my previous answer. No, it was a very bad idea. But look, this is the deal. They'd been in there for 20 years or 19 years by then, and President Trump uh, just basically there was Afghanistan war fatigue, and they felt that, of course, the bulk of the troops are already left by December 2014, also including NATO troops. So there weren't that many left, only 5,000 or so, and then down to 2,500. But they wanted to get out. The argument being that why should we be going to Afghanistan? Why were we there to start with? And we can talk about that again later. But the fact is they were there. They were not winning. And don't forget, for the last, from the end of 2014 until now, they weren't really doing much fighting. It was mainly training, mentoring, and things like that. And the fighting that we're doing was mainly against Al Qaeda and other extra non-Afghan terrorist groups. Okay, so they felt it was time to get out. The agreement. So, but the problem is for a big country like the United States or any country, when they go into it's easy to go into war. It's much more difficult to get out. It's always difficult, especially if you want to leave with, not totally humiliated. And so Trump was very much looking for some sort of fig leaf, any fig leaf, even a see-through fig leaf. Okay, and so this arrangement, this deal that he cut with the Taliban, totally legitimized the Taliban, delegitimized the Kabul government. I mean, it is quite unbelievable that the Americans cut a deal with this insurgency group without the Afghan government involved, and then they cut a deal with them, are given basically an exit strategy, an exit ticket to get out of Afghanistan so Trump can save face. And it's, in this case, actually Biden, who actually fully supported this agreement. And then they cut a deal with the insurgents, and then they tell the President Ghani, okay, it's all yours. You now deal with the Taliban. We're out of here. And they're out of here even faster than the date that's set, a date which was going to be 9/11, which I don't understand the psychology of this, of using that incredible date that has been seared in every American's mind and to use that as a humiliating date to depart. I mean, I don't stand this personally. But anyway, so the fact that it's a lousy deal. And I talked to friends of mine, what do you expect them to do? I said, they should have left a tripwire force, even if it's 2,000 troops. Simply, psychologically, it would have given President Ghani. Now, should President Ghani and his government still be in power? That's another issue, given the corruption and all that. But it would have given them a feel that we haven't been abandoned. They're still here. Now, we know they have been abandoned. They are gone. And now it doesn't matter how fast the situation is getting so bad now in Afghanistan, the Americans are not going back. Absolutely not going back. They will bomb the Taliban until, as I said that, we will bomb the Taliban until we leave, which is the end of August, and then we stop bombing. And if we do any bombing, then I'm not meaning, once we stop bombing, we'll bomb only Al Qaeda. Good luck seeing that from the air. The bottom line is this: strategy 101. You don't win wars from the air. You win wars with boots on the ground. And so by bombing Taliban, sure, they'll slow them down a bit. Taliban just hide and wait the bombs stop coming down and they go on again. So it's all very bad. So this deal is really bad news for Afghanistan. And the problem is, should they have gone in? Who knows? I can understand why they went in to start with, to fight Al Qaeda. But then they decide, okay, now we're going to reorganize this country called Afghanistan. We'll make it into, I don't know, Swiss model, Swedish model, whatever model you want to call it. And we're going to centralize it. And it will be, democracy out of Sweden, and everyone will be happy. Well, it didn't actually quite work out that way. And then they gave up after 20 years. Well, should have asked the British and the Russians before, but anyway. So.
Professor, I will come to Kashmir now. After abrogation of the autonomy that was granted to Kashmir, and a provision was inserted in the constitution, which we know very well as Article 370. That has now been abrogated in 2019. Do you think after 2019, Pakistan has also mellowed its stance on Kashmir? They are not as forcefully pleading Kashmir issue in international forums?
Yeah. I think no. I would disagree. I think Prime Minister Imran Khan has been very forceful. Certainly, because there was a big.
He spoke in UN, but after that, we see a little bit of a mellowed stance. He did speak in UN on Kashmir.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, he's still. I don't know. I mean, that's a tough one. I still think Pakistan is probably the only country that actually makes a lot of noises for Kashmir. And that brings me to the bigger issue. I am utterly disgusted with the fact how the Islamic world completely and utterly ignore Kashmir, and for that matter, the Uyghurs in Xinjiang province in China. Not a word is said. And everyone is involved in that. So sure, Pakistan makes a lot of noise. I'm going to lose a lot of friends saying this, but anyway, Pakistan makes a lot of noise about Kashmir, as it should. But it makes no noise about the Uyghurs in Xinjiang province. Nothing. And it's not only Pakistan, all of them. And even going back to the Taliban, they were asked. They have said openly, they said, we care about all Muslims in the world. We will fight for them in Palestine, in Kashmir. We care about all of them. But we will not get involved in the internal affairs of China. That takes care of the Uyghurs. Because at the end of the day, all countries, that's the way it is. It doesn't matter the Muslim, Hindu, whatever. At the end of the day, it's all about national interest. It's as simple as that. And so, and it comes down to money and trade and economics. And so whether we talk about Saudi Arabia or UAE or any of them, name them all, they will either side, even with India. on Kashmir. They will cite that, or simply say nothing. Even the OIC is very quiet. And so it's just because it's easier that way, because that's the way it is. And same thing about the Uyghurs. In that case, because China is so big, and trade with China brings a lot of money, big bucks. And so it's safer not to. And there are very few countries that will say something about Kashmir, and that's really Turkey and Malaysia, from what I remember. And so that's the sad fact of life. And that leaves then the Kashmiris all alone. And so Pakistan, I still do think, is one of the few countries that actually does make a lot of noise about Kashmir. But people will say, oh, well, would you expect that, because, Kashmir and, unresolved territory. And of course, Indians will just say, well, they're a bunch of terrorists anyway. And the only thing they do is send terrorists across the border. But no, so I still think he's still making a lot of noises. But, there's only that much he can do.
So we can't go to war. We cannot afford that.
No, absolutely not. No, and both countries know this, that they know that war between the two countries, between Pakistan and India, would just be a total disaster, not only for the two countries, incidentally, but for the world. I mean, if they had war and they actually used nuclear weapons, it would be, the figures will be in the millions of deaths around the world instead of the nuclear cloud. It would just be a disaster. But he also he knows he's limited by what he can do. That's why but they're all boxed in. They don't want to, and this is why I put a lot of effort into what I was thinking about my suggestion. But there's gotta be, and I'm sure there could be other suggestions. What I'm saying, there is no political will to resolve it.
Absolutely,
I think there's political will on the part of Pakistan, definitely political will. But the Indians have absolutely no interest. And let's be specific. Prime Minister Modi has absolutely no interest, because, okay, Kashmiris are Muslims, they're a minority. He's got a massive majority in both houses. There is no pressure. And you know what they say, 9/10 of the law is when you're sitting on something. So, he's on top of Kashmir, and they say, okay, you're going to remove me? I don't think so. And no one's going to go to war over it. Absolutely not. And so you hear all these fine words by fine people who all speak very nicely and about human rights and how awful it is, but nothing happens. And that's it. And so, Prime Minister Modi does not have to have a political will to resolve it, because there's no pressure.
There's absolutely no pressure. And because the OIC has maintained a complete silence over the issue, the Modi government in India is in a win-win situation.
Absolutely.
So, Professor, where do you think track 2 diplomacy is headed between India and Pakistan? Is there any track 2 diplomacy at present?
Well, not that I know of. Now, of course, there may very well be some track 2 diplomacy, because track 2 diplomacy, by its very nature, is not secretive, but it's not in the limelight. It's not, like official, where everyone knows and sees it. I think track 2, or even track 1.5, is really the way to go. And that's what I said as well in my article about how to resolve Kashmir. Is what you really need is, as I said, there's none, but I think there's potential. Because I know that the people of India and the people of Pakistan, they don't want war. They want peace, so that both countries can just develop. People don't like war. They don't like to die. They don't like to have the infrastructure destroyed. It's just bad. It's lose-lose. No one wins, really, except, the weapons-making people. But,
Coming to your write-up on Kashmir, I would like to hear what can be bartered for peace, as there is a deadlock between the two nations, India and Pakistan. Who holds the keys to the lock?
Well, I think the keys to the lock is really somehow managing to convince both Prime Minister Modi, he's the one who really needs convincing, and Prime Minister Imran Khan, that, guys, we need to fix Kashmir. And again, I go back, Kashmir is important because it's the crux of the problem between two countries. And one way to, the key to that, I think, I really fundamentally believe, because I have been involved in 1.5 track dialogues and second track dialogue. And second track dialogues, incidentally, can be very effective. The Oslo Agreement for Palestine, okay, was very effective. Now, of course, it's all dead, but it was very effective, and it was out of the limelight. So and I think, and the way I was suggesting is that let's get both countries, both leaders agreeing, look, guys, why don't we just have a second track dialogue and let them, would you agree to a second track dialogue? And if they say yes, then we have people from civil society, academics, journalists, former politicians, former generals, whatever, part of that second track dialogue, and nut out and flesh out agreements about how to fix Kashmir, like what I suggested in my paper. And then if they come up with something and they just talk, no obligations whatsoever, then they come up with something and they bring that up and say, and they send it back then to Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Imran Khan and say, look, this is what we've agreed to.
That's
Yeah.
what, Professor, I was asking you. What should be bartered between the two nations for a long-lasting peace?
Well, the way I see Kashmir,
what's your opinion on
well,
that?
the way I see it, I think the only way to resolve it, I know a lot of people will disagree, even people who are very, very well disposed towards trying to resolve Kashmir. Some people are really quite dogmatic about this, and they feel, look, there are UN resolutions, and there should be only two questions. You want to for the referendum? Do you want to join Pakistan or do you join India? I don't think that's right. Things have moved on in the last 70 years. I think every part of Kashmir, and I'm talking about the wider region of Kashmir. So Baltistan, Gilgit-Baltistan, Azad Jammu Kashmir, the Kashmir Valley, Jammu and Ladakh, all five of them, although they're all completely different, and because they're all different, should all be able to vote either for Pakistan, India, or Kashmir. The vote would be taken simultaneously but counted separately. Okay, because to just have Pakistan, India for all of it, it's just crazy. Because you count it all up, the majority Muslim, they go Pakistan, we have war. It just will not work. So we have then the 5 different bits. I suspect, I don't know. You tell me, how would and now continue. How would the Kashmir Valley vote, just as a thing, if they were given the 3 choices and a free vote, a fair, free, and fair?
You did ask me this question before also. I answered you. I will give you the same answer today as well. Majority of the Kashmiris would vote for Pakistan. Definitely, they would vote for Pakistan. And given the Modi dispensation, many of the people who were Indians prior to the coming of Modi, who were hardcore Indians, I mean the mainstream politicians of Kashmir, they too sound like separatists nowadays because they are not happy with the Modi government's functioning. So most of them would definitely vote for Pakistan. Many would even choose an independent nation, provided there would be a similar referendum on the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir as well.
No, absolutely. I mean, but this is what I said. So you would have to have all parts would be given the choice of independence, Pakistan or India. But you feel so even the young generation would go for Pakistan in the valley?
Yeah, I do feel so because of what after the abrogation of Article 370, the happenings that have been here in Kashmir, the economy has slowed down. We are not allowed to raise any voice. There is no voice of dissent. Even governance, there's a governance deficit. So if on today's date, there would be a referendum, surely many would vote for, majority of the people would vote for Pakistan. That's another question, that Pakistani minorities are not safe there. The record of minority rights, there's violence against them. That set apart, Pakistan has got its own internal problems also. That set apart, many would vote for Pakistan. Majority of the people would vote for Pakistan.
Well, that's interesting. I'm a bit surprised because the fact is Pakistan has issues, has problems,
Deep
and if they
issues.
were in the yeah, and the thing is that if the Kashmir Valley was independent, they have beautiful sceneries. They could live off basically beautiful tourism. I mean, now it's dead, the tourism, because of what's happened, and this is why I'm very
Exactly.
surprised that they would want to join Pakistan. But again, that would have to be. Uh, we don't know. I trust you that yeah, that's a feel you have. Uh, but the way I would see it is that not. It would have to be. The way I see it is that all parts of Kashmir would have to be demilitarized. Not only the one that's independent, if anyone would vote independent, but everything should be demilitarized, and there should be free movement of people between all bits of Kashmir. That would resolve it, so that there's not this blockage. You know, but I don't think that's going to happen. But the fact is, what we need to do, go back to your second track dialogue, is that they should come up with something. They bring it up and to Prime Minister Modi and Imran Khan, and then if they agreed to have the second track dialogue, then they can then take whatever the second track dialogue came up with, and then negotiate this officially, and then have maybe the UN or the Commonwealth to basically monitor the referendum. But I wasn't born yesterday, so I'm not naive about all these issues. Um, I'm very, very pessimistic. But things do happen. Things do
I
happen.
was going, I was going to ask you, Professor, that's a very ticklish question, in fact. Do you see a resolution of Kashmir happening in the future, in the coming future,
No, I don't actually. Very
in the
sad
near
that
future, in the terms that
I
we want?
I don't see it because there's no pressure to resolve it, and the way Prime Minister Modi is doing things, he's basically trying to change the demographics. He's probably going to try to force people to prove that they're actually Kashmiris, so they can take away some of their citizenship if possible. Bring back some of the Hindus as well. I mean, there's a lot of ways of doing it, and they've already given you know uh,
They've
rights to live there,
already
over 3 million.
trifurcated the state. They've already
Exactly.
trifurcated the state, and that suits their own agenda. Because Kashmir, as such, was a majority Muslim state. Now, by
Yeah,
trifurcation, they are only working on their own agenda.
that's right.
So,
And so and there's no pressure on him. He knows it, and so uh, he doesn't care.
no, he
And I'm
doesn't
I'm not sure. He
because
doesn't
he
care.
knows
And
he
the
can get away with it. He knows
absolutely. And
he can get away with it.
let's say even if the BJP loses the next election, which is seriously unlikely, but let's say the Congress Party gets in. I mean, the Congress Party is a shadow of its former self. Uh, I'm not sure how they would behave. I'm not sure.
That's a
I really
very
don't.
That's a very realistic observation, Professor.
Yeah.
Because on Kashmir issue, all the political parties are on the same platform. That's how Modi managed to get the bill through the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha, the upper and the lower
Yeah.
house of Parliament, and they're absolutely one. There will be no change. At least I feel so. This is my personal opinion. Even though it's sub judice, the case is in the Supreme Court, but I don't see it happening.
No, no, I agree with you. We're on the same page, and this is why it's so sad what's happening. But again, there's no the only way I could see movement is that, and again, that's not going to happen. But is that if the international community or the United States, but the United States has got all these other big issues to worry about, China, is that to have an incentive saying, okay, look, Prime Minister Modi, you're the only Democrat around. Look, we'll provide money for development of Kashmir, all of Kashmir, if we can have a referendum. That's the only way to sugarcoat it somehow. But there's no, and don't forget COVID. COVID has completely completely changed international relations. I mean, all countries are now broke. I mean, every country in the world now we've spent probably around 10% of the GDP on trying to pump up their economy. We have in Australia, for example. We will be paying back the debt for the next 40 years. We know that in Australia and United States, everywhere. And so, countries don't have money to throw around. And it'll be, and don't forget the United States and all that. They're actually accountable, the democracies. They actually can't just throw money around and try to justify it. It's very difficult. And when they go to the next election, they say, 1 minute, what's all this money you throw to India, Kashmir? I mean, when we here are broke, and I can see that. And so every president, prime minister in this world, they've got to think not only about their re-election, but also their own people. And the pie is only this big, and it's not growing very much. It's actually getting smaller.
Exactly, Professor. Professor, let's come to the SARC. SARC was a conglomerate of all these South Asian nations that was supposed to build cooperation among the nations and free trade zones. And it was a very, very significant organ and institution which was supposed to bring all these South Asian nations together. What do you think has deconstructed SARC? Why has it become so invisible lately? Despite
Well,
its significance, key significance in the region. And
well,
what
I
have been
think
the repercussions of its becoming so deconstructed?
I briefly touched on that already earlier on in my answers. It's SARC. The problem with SARC is that it was a great idea to start with, but the problem is with SARC is, of course, it's completely dominated by India, and when it's so dominated, it makes it very difficult then to develop, because the other thing is, the problem is the domination of India. That's one issue. The other issue is that because there's so much baggage between the countries, and we're talking mainly, of course, the baggage between India and Pakistan, the two biggest countries in the SARC. And when you go into a club with a lot of baggage, okay, it makes it difficult to actually have conversations, discussions that are free, open, and honest. Okay, because you're always thinking, okay, the Pakistanis will be thinking, what are the Indians trying to do here, and vice versa. So there's that issue. The other issue is, of course, a lot of them are producing exactly the same stuff. Why would Pakistan buy the same textiles that it makes? Why would it buy from India or Bangladesh, for that matter, when they make their own stuff? So a lot of them actually all make the same sort of goods, and that's why I would say less than 20%, about 20% of trade is with each other, the SARC nations, and that's minimal. I mean, it's not going to go anywhere. But the main reason, I think, is the lack of trust between the two countries, and this has got much worse. I mean, the last one was meant to be held in Islamabad, that was cancelled by India, putting pressure on everyone, basically saying you're not going. And so, when you're a small country like Sri Lanka or Bangladesh or Nepal, whatever, and the big brother next door to you tells you what to do, you jump and you do it. And so it's very, very difficult. So I don't see SARC going anywhere.
Professor, with regard to China, China has made territorial aggressions in Ladakh, in the Indian territory. But India has not forcefully pleaded its cause, and they're playing it very cool, whether it's India or whether it's China. On the other hand, China is making inroads into the region. It's building itself as a superpower in the nation. What do you think will be its role in building the socio-political role there, and in building an economic itself as an economic power in the region? As we have so many nations, it's flourishing in the region, in fact. And US, we have, on the other hand, countering China at all levels.
Yeah. Okay. Lots of questions there. Well, first of all, China pretty much gave a bloody nose to India last year in Ladakh. And, obviously India want to keep a low profile on that. I mean, in many ways, the world should stop comparing, try to compare India with China. There's actually no comparison.
Exactly.
Presumably the only, pardon me?
There's no comparison. That's right, Professor. I agree with you.
No, absolutely.
India and China are two different economies.
Completely, absolutely. The only comparison, I suppose, is that they're about the same size in population. But the big difference is the economies. In many ways, the economic liberalization, both in China, really started around 1979, but actually only started about 10 years later in India. That makes a big difference to have that 10-year gap. The other big difference, of course, is that China is a highly authoritarian country. I know we've been saying quite a lot of negative things about India, and it's going very authoritarian, but it's not on par with China. China is totally dictatorship, and they can then demand and impose on the provinces what needs to be produced, where it's going to be produced, how long it's going to take, whatever. And so they can just do that, okay? And so everything now in China is super modern. It is like incredible. It's like fast, it's brand new, it's modern, it's clean, it's effective, it's efficient, it's incredible. I would say that's the same in India. And I would say Prime Minister Modi would agree, okay? So that's a big difference there. They have a military that is growing, Chinese that is growing exponentially. They have the biggest navy, bigger than the United States, and their ships are all new compared to America's ships. Some are new and some are not so new. Okay, and they're churning out new ships daily, lots of them. Okay, and so their military is becoming very, very big and very efficient. And so in Ladakh, it's no surprise that they won and they gave a bloody nose to the Indians. They didn't have to kill many people, but they made their message clear. And they've, again, and you don't know who to believe, of course, because it's not as if CNN is crawling all over Ladakh to be able to take pictures and to check what's happening there. But very much my understanding is they have actually captured some territory in Ladakh. Okay, and the message is clear. And so, sure, the Indians are beefing up their military presence in Ladakh, but at the end of the day, they didn't do well at all. Absolutely not well. So that's that. But and so that's going to be something that's going to keep the Indians on their toes over there. And certainly one of the reasons why they had a sort of renewal. The Indians had a renewal of their ceasefire agreement with the Pakistanis is because in the 2013 one, it's to basically not have a two-front war. Because they know that China and Pakistan are good friends, and certainly the last thing they want to have is some sort of a two-front fight, kinetic activity in Ladakh or in Kashmir with Pakistan and China. I mean, that would be the disaster scenario for the Indians. But so that's why there was this renewal of the agreement between Pakistan and India. Now the thing is with China is, of course, is this whole CPEC thing. Now CPEC, there are different views about CPEC, obviously, like most things. But CPEC, I think at the end, one thing, it's going to be very expensive for Pakistan. CPEC is not a gift from China to Pakistan. It is not a gift. It's actually very expensive. Okay, they're going to have to pay back a lot of money. Most of it is built by Chinese workers, as we know. They're the ones who get killed on a regular basis by the TTP and the Baluch Liberation Army. But what the good news is that at the end of the day, there will be new infrastructure, pipelines, gas lines, roads, railroads, okay, for Pakistan. That's good news. But what's good news for India is, of course, at the end of the day, when all that's built, nicely built and all that, that will affect it, and I've written about that, it will make China a two-ocean nation. If you look at a map, then that means they will have an outlet to the Pacific and an outlet Indian Ocean through Gwadar. Okay, there are a few issues with Gwadar now, but I think there's a lot of potential there. Okay, and once that develops, Gwadar, both as a hub for trade, but also for oil refinery. I think there's a lot of potential there. How much the Baluch people are going to benefit from that? That's another issue. That's why we have the BLA not so happy. But so China is really is investing a lot of time, a lot of money into Pakistan, and has for many years now. But this whole CPEC really brings it to another level, because I mean CPEC is very much the crown and the BRI, the jewel and the BRI crown, very much so. It's a big one, but it will connect with everything else, and this is why I believe they're very keen to be able to really be able to put Afghanistan on their side of the game, so that they can connect with all the other things they've already done in Central Asia, and just move on and all the way to right through Turkey to Europe, and the sky's the limit. And so and the other thing, the BRI is a fantastic outlet for the Chinese to basically send out all their overproduction of steel, cement, and all these stuff they're building, because they're overproducing things. They have cities in China that are empty, with high rises empty, completely empty. And so this BRI and the CPEC and all that allows them then to just dump basically all that stuff there and build other infrastructure, and all the way to Africa and all that. So in a way, they are just overpowering. And you take Central Asia, for example, which for the longest time was very much a Russian backyard. The Chinese are all over it. And this is why Russia is not so keen to see the Chinese move into Afghanistan.
That's a fact, because Russians are very much worried about China making inroads into the region. They are trying to counter it, but China is moving way forward. Yeah. Professor, we'll try to conclude it now. I'm aware that you have time constraints also. Professor, can we imagine, in fact, reimagine the Indian subcontinent as a peace park and have a long, sustainable peace in the region?
I think it is doable. I think it is doable. What we need is, if we could have someone like Imran Khan as Prime Minister of India, that would be really good. And I mean, I sincerely mean this. I think, and that's possible. There are a lot of good people in India, and a lot of leaders in India who know we Indians, we are not traveling in the right direction with this character, and we need someone else. What he's doing is very bad for India, because it's making India wobbly. And it's not because the West and the rest of the world are not talking about it that they don't know that there are issues of human rights. And when a country is weak internally, they cannot be very good, partners in the Quad or whatever. And so, big nations, and I've said this before, the UN, big nations do not mistreat the minorities. They embrace them. And what he's doing to 200 million Muslims is very bad. And if he continues, I'm actually very surprised there's not Indian Muslim terrorists hanging around there, or actually active. And he's actually asking for it. And that's not the way to do things. And so I believe there can be peace in South Asia if we have a leader in India who actually, doesn't think only and doesn't only think about beating up on Pakistan.
Exactly.
And I think it's doable. It's just, just have to keep hoping. That's all I can say.
Exactly, Professor. We just have to keep hoping. We just hope that somebody from the right-thinking regime, right-thinking people, dons the mantle that Modi has on his head right now. Because people are suffering. The Indians are suffering. He has undone what was done over the period of 75 years. One last question.
Absolutely.
One last question, Professor. Recently, we saw the Taliban going and meeting the Chinese counterparts. Do you think a positive equation will build between Taliban, who had a very extremist orthodox ideology, and China, because they have a poor record in with the Uyghur Muslims. Do you think a positive relationship will build?
Okay, I think I wrote about that, and I put that in my on Twitter. I'm not sure if you could call it a positive relationship, but there will be a relationship, and I do believe they will, because the Taliban. I won't be the only one thinking this. I think the Taliban will win, and I think they will again be in the presidential palace. And at the end of the day, they have set themselves. They are not going to get involved in internal dynamics, internal politics of China. So again, a bit like all the other ones, OIC and many other most Muslim countries, they are not going to make any noise about the Uyghurs, very sadly, because they all see it's in their interest to have China come into Afghanistan, invest, and help develop the country. Is that good news for Afghanistan? Who knows? But quite frankly, I think it will be better news than having India. And I'll tell you why. Because just imagine if you're in Pakistan, I always say this to my students when I teach international relations. Always look at when you're analyzing a country, what would it feel like to be in Islamabad or in Beijing or in Kabul or whatever, okay? And so can you imagine if all of a sudden, and I know the West is pushing India very hard to get involved in Afghanistan, go in there, go in there. Well, I think that's the silliest idea I can imagine, because the last thing that they should be doing is going to Afghanistan, and that would really upset Pakistan, because they would have Indians on the left and Indians on the right, and that would make them feel uncomfortable. And any country that feels unsafe, it actually becomes they do things that are bad. And if the Indians actually had any ideas of, let's say, even sending troops to Afghanistan, I don't think that's going to happen. They did this. Pakistan will simply, there will be trouble then in Kashmir. That I can, you can be assured there will be a reaction. To every action, there's a reaction. And so I think Afghanistan, will go for a China deal, because they've got the money, they can invest, they can promise things to link up with CPEC and Central Asia. And I think that will be a more comfortable fit for Afghanistan, or Taliban-run Afghanistan, than an Indian presence.
Sure, Professor. Only if they could set their rights record straight, they had much to take away from China, and it was very good for the region itself. Thank you very much, Professor, for this enlightening conversation. I thank you for your time. I thank you very, very much for being with me. Thank you. Thank you again, Professor.
It was my pleasure. Thank you. It was a pleasure meeting you. Some tough questions. Hope I wasn't too repetitive. Let me know what's the link for the on Twitter, so I can check it all out.
Sure, Professor. I'll let you know on that count. I'll share it with you. Definitely.
Okay. Thank you very much. And take care of yourself.
You
okay.
too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.